Typically, workouts follow the same structure: warm-up, stretching, lifting, accessories, and then cardio last. And the majority of coaches design their workouts in the same way, regardless of what sport their athlete's playing or their individual goals. In this video, I get to talk with Seth Page from Jump Ship Training about how this method is potentially flawed and how he is now adapting his program to help athletes at the highest level reach their maximum potential. If you don't know Seth, he's been working with CrossFit Games athletes and writing competitive CrossFit programming for over a decade. He's one of the most knowledgeable coaches and programmers in the competitive CrossFit space, and he's one of the first people to challenge this traditional model of how to write a training program. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. First, Seth, thank you for taking the time to jump on and chat with me today. You and I have both been into CrossFit for forever. So when I started CrossFit, there was a general, I guess, feeling about it that was, only for elite athletes. It was the, tip of the spear kind of thing. Forging elite fitness was like the tagline. And I think that to this day, some of that stigma is still around, but I also, as an affiliate owner, I really believe in what Greg Glassman said in the needs of an Olympic athlete and your grandmother vary by degree, not kind. So before we get to talking about the lifting versus Metcon first or whatever, could you just tell me, since you have a lot of experience with CrossFit programming, what is, I guess, the difference in programming for elite level athletes and programming for your average person in your gym?
That's a great question to kick things off with, really. So for the gym, basically, it's in my thought process, it's like throwing a general net of fitness out there that you're trying to capture as many people, as broad of an audience as you can with this net, right? So like you just said, if my grandmother walks in the gym or some D1 collegiate athlete walks in the gym and they both want to have a challenging CrossFit experience, the program has to support both of them simultaneously, right? So it's important, I think, that when you're writing for a broader population that could include anybody and everybody, things have to be simplified and general. That makes them easy to modify and scale, especially in a class setting when it might be one coach to 15 people, right? So just having this basic principles that we all have learned for now a decade and a half in CrossFit, variance, intensity, but intensity to to each person's ability. So relative intensity, I guess you'd call it. And then the functional movements, making sure you're not asking them to do something completely outrageous, something that their body should be able to do and should be able to do somewhat frequently, even if the pattern itself is varied a little bit. So it's just casting a very broad net and then having the skill to be able to work with these people in person to make small little modifications or give them the tools to understand what those modifications should look like. So avoiding the super complicated formats, avoiding percentages, which is one thing that I dive all over all the time. You probably see not trying to give percentages that are going to work for grandma and Superman Steve. Those percentages won't line up. It just doesn't work that way. Even though you're using a percentage for them, it just won't work that way. So just casting that big broad net. And then when you start talking about elite level athletes, you start talking sport specific, right? So when you're in the gym, you're talking general fitness and wellness. You're talking elite level, it becomes more sport specific, typically to the CrossFit season. So we have certain movements that are more important at different stages of the year, or styles of workouts that are more important. And so you're just making sure that all those things are covered in a, again, sport specific way.
In general, and when you start talking about this topic, I kind of noticed that it's not just, CrossFit that does this kind of format, but it's pretty much fitness in general. It's pretty traditional to do some kind of warm up, some kind of stretching, and then you kind of go into your lifting, you do your accessory pieces, and then at the end you do your cardio, even if you're at a 24-hour fitness or whatever, that's still that's the format that people follow. They're not, most people you don't see trying to run hard on the treadmill first thing.
Right.
So why do you think that this kind of structure has happened over the years, and what do you think that's about?
I think logically, even in my logical brain, that still makes the most sense in the sense of like, when you're lifting heavy, you're trying to, or you would expect to have or need the most amount of energy and power to do that. When you think about aerobic work or even lighter skill work, you could talk gymnastics or whatever else, you don't need the same amount of like power output or energy availability to do some of those things because it's on a much the way you use the energy is longer and slower, right? So
Right.
from that perspective, all the way back, to the beginning of classic strength and conditioning, you would think, oh, well, you have the most energy at the beginning of your session. You should be focusing on your heavy squats, your heavy deadlifts, or whatever that is, early on, and then making sure, it's anyone can run on a treadmill after that, or anyone go for a jog or do this. So like,
Right.
you don't need that much energy. So we'll just end with that. But so I think that's the classic thought. And I think most people in the CrossFit space now, we had basically people that have been in as long as you and I and some of the others that have been in. There's not really that many OGs around anymore writing programs, to be honest with you. But those
Yeah.
we had .com to learn from, right? We had CrossFit.com. That was our first base to figure out CrossFit. And then the rest has been all our own experiences. We didn't have these models of what a CrossFit program should look like. And so I have to either go through .com or look up, information on classic strength and conditioning programming and then see how I can adapt that. And every classic program that's strength
What they
and
do.
conditioning is it's what they do. So
So I know this idea of kind of switching up the order has been stewing with you for a while now. I guess what made you want to change the way that you do your format with jump ship for all athletes across the board, and like why now?
that's a good question. So yeah, what's funny is like, so pretty much close to the beginning of Jump Ship, I was working with like China Cho. My wife was a high level competitor for a long time, among some others who always switch the program up anyway. And I was like, okay, I see, some of them are older athletes or not as high level as they used to be or masters or whatever. So I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense actually for a master to lift after because they're complaining about, my left knee hurts or my upper body's tight or whatever. So if you work out first and lift after, you would think the range of motion would be better. You just be warm, right? So
Mhm.
that's my general concept anyway. But then I started thinking more about it early on and I was like, really everyone would benefit from this as long as the prior piece to the lifting is written and performed, with a certain intention. Because if I gave you, 10 by 20 echo bite sprints with 2 minutes rest, I could absolutely devastate your legs to the point where like there's really no point hitting front squats or back squats after that, right? You're going to be like
Right.
60%. So there's like, you're not going to get that much out of it. But I can make a perfectly fine workout that's balanced, that targets your aerobic system, targets some skills, and is perfectly worthwhile. And through that, prime you for lifting and prime everybody for lifting heavier after. So the that was the whole thought behind it. But I was too afraid to make the change. So because of the classic thought process, and I personally was afraid of the pushback I was going to get from the community and others. Like, I haven't really cared about what people thought about me, but I care about what people think about my program because it's my livelihood, right? So if I like
For
make
sure.
this change that's counter culture to what everyone else is doing, and everyone literally jumps ship for me and goes, this isn't for me, and doesn't give it a real shot, I would just be hurting myself in a personal financial way when what I'm doing, pays my bills and works perfectly fine. But I got to
Yeah.
the point where my wife she just like grabbed me one day and was like, okay, we've both been talking about this forever. You just need to make the switch. Like, let's rip the band-aid off. Let's do it after the open.
For sure.
Just like start talking about it now so people can start to process why and how, give them time. And then once you introduce it, people will be ready for it and it won't be whatever. And so that's how we landed to where we are right this second.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely when you first started bringing it up, I was like, that's interesting. But I
Yeah.
mean, I remember the first time that I lifted heavy really after Metcon was open workout 15.1, this triplet of 15 toes to bar deadlifts and snatches. And then
Yes.
afterwards, it was like
a really short time window to find a 1 rep max clean and jerk. And in this workout, I did awful on 15-1, but I crushed 1A, and I put up like a top 100 score of the region at the time, which was really good for me, and I was super proud of that. What, I guess, was your first exposure to the idea that you can lift heavy after a metcon, and like, that you might
or
even be able to
during.
lift better? Yeah, or during, yeah.
Yeah. Yep. This, and I can't remember which year it was, but I have this fresh in my mind. I know where I was when I started watching a few athletes do this workout. I remember all the details about it. I remember the athletes. I'm not going to get into it. It's from the past, but I
Mhm.
remember very clearly this workout and what it kind of did to me. And not personally, but watching. And also the other one that really made me start thinking about energy systems different and how to kind of get the most out of it was the chest to bar. Was it chest to bar squat snatch? Was it? What's the one where the squat snatches get heavier and heavier as you go with the chest to bar? Yeah, I think that's one. I
Oh,
can't remember what year it was. You know what I'm talking about? You had like a certain amount of chest to
yeah,
bar, and then you had
yeah.
squat snatches, and the weight
Mhm.
got heavy. I think the guy's weight ended up getting up to like 245 or something. I actually don't
Yep.
remember the details, but those numbers then I just remember were like 90,
Crazy.
95, 100% of a lot of the competitors' snatches at the last bar. And people were hitting them for reps. They weren't just
Yeah.
PRing once, they were hitting them for multiple reps 20 minutes into a workout. So when I started seeing that, I'm like, why is no one talking about this more? This
Mhm.
should be groundbreaking for strength and conditioning for the whole world. No one has ever accepted the concept that when you burn through your phosphogenic system and that takes 5 minutes to recover before you can go again, and you're supposed to be resting fully, yet someone's at 180 heart rate and they're continuing to go and they're not letting it recover, yet they found a way to just hit 105% of their snatch, which should
Mhm.
not happen. Okay, what's happening? Like, people didn't really step back and think about it, I don't think, the way that I did, and said, okay, like, how do I use this to my advantage? Like, why is it on any? I mean, obviously, the side of competition, people show up, and that was the open. It was a
Right.
bigger deal than it was today back then. So people are ready for game day. But still, if you're just talking the exercise science behind it, that stuff should not have been happening. And it was. So
Yeah.
something to think about.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I feel like in years past, after 15.1, like I've done a handful of metcons where it was in the similar format, but it was like more of like a test. It's like, hey, let's get you really tired and then see what you got on this lift. Um, like, why do you think that, I guess, changing the training portion to this format is beneficial, not just like as a test, but also like, do you think that this has capabilities to help you get more from your training, more from your strength sessions, and like, not just from a let's make you tired and test it, but like, yeah.
To get the most out of a lifting session, in my opinion, you need to be like extremely warm. Most people don't do enough to get warmed up before they start lifting. So, like, they'll do a general warm up or they'll do a dynamic warm up. Or, I mean, how many people do you know that go in there and give yourself one of these and then start putting
Yeah.
plates on the bar, right? Like, that's unfortunately extremely typical of CrossFitters and other strength and conditioning athletes. They just warm up in their lighter sets as they go. But the problem is, you're not typically doing that many sets. And when you're talking about getting the most out of the time you have to train, let's say you train for somewhere between an hour to 2 hours a day. That's a big gap, but it covers a lot of athletes. So you might only have, time for 8 total sets of back squat in your session with everything else you have to hit, especially in CrossFit. So now you're not that warm. Your first 4 or 5 sets of your back squat are literally just priming and warming up your body for the 3 to 4 heavy sets that you're going to get out of it. So if I give you like an 8x3 or something in back squat, you're really only doing a working sets of 4x3 or 3x3 even by the time you get to a useful percentage that's going to make an adaptation or change. Again, this is just theoretical, my opinion. I've never done any studies. This is just observation. But
For sure.
instead, if you did a 10-minute AMRAP of something that had goblet squats and pull-ups and whatever else before, and you approached it, let's say 70 to 80% effort, whatever that is, in 8 RP, whatever you want to call it, you give yourself 5 minutes to rest before you start loading up your back squat bar. It only takes now 1 to 2, maybe 3 sets to now get to a working weight of that back squat. So now you may have doubled the amount of working sets you can do in the same time window in the same prescription. That's different if you're using percentage work, but then if you're using percentage work and you're starting your lifts first, it's going to take super long to warm up just lifting to get up to the percentage working sets. And you still may not be getting the most out of them. Whereas if you actually did a more complete body workout, which is going to completely pump oxygen rich blood through all your tissue, all your joints, everything, getting you super ready to then get the most out of your lift. So I just think you could think of it as an extended warm up, that first piece, or extended warm up for your lift, but it's also serving a purpose as a prior conditioning skill piece, whatever, leading into it.
I think it's funny the way that CrossFit has kind of progressed over the years. And like, this is another, I want to make a video about, I see this big discrepancy between like what CrossFit teaches in the level 1, what the world sees as like the sport and the CrossFit Games, and then like what we actually end up doing as affiliate owners and like people running a gym, and they're like way completely different. And like what happens in the affiliate is like it's like based on what happened at the L1, and the sport is like loosely based on what happens in the affiliate, but like they are very different. And you know, like when you started talking about this, and I was like, like I think you said at one point you were like, CrossFit will always be like a sport of conditioning, like it's conditioning first. And like this pyramid that everyone has seen in the L1, it's like nutrition is the foundation, but like metabolic conditioning is the first tier. And then it's gymnastics, and then it's weightlifting and throwing. And it's like, for whatever reason, we've just gone in this direction where it's like everyone's so obsessed with weightlifting. And like, I mean, I love weightlifting. I think the snatch and clean and jerk are awesome, but like, it's just so biased in that direction. And like, you know, if you look up the definition of priority, it's like what comes prior is most important. And so it's like, it only makes sense that if in a CrossFit setting, if your priority is metabolic conditioning, like why wouldn't you do it first, you know? So I guess, why do you think that like we all agree on this at the L1, but then like the vast majority of gyms just don't end up actually training their athletes that way?
Yeah, it's man, that's actually a really deep question. So like I've owned like 6 different gyms now. I have 2 in Hawaii, and I've been a part of all these different communities. They couldn't all be any more different than they were. They're just so different. But one thing is in common: we are afraid of not giving them enough sexiness with their workouts or their excitement or whatever, right? So like if you did, if 4 to 5 days they weren't seeing a very like exciting lift or something really great in there, they'd be like, oh, okay, like running intervals, like I'm not even going to go today. What am I getting out of that? And it's like, well, you're getting the most out of that actually. But like for you, I understand you want to load up a heavy barbell. So I think part of it is like, we're business people too, and we know our clients get very excited on a day where they're going to get to go heavy on something. So we want to give them that more often than maybe they need, because we are retaining members, right? So part of it is not necessarily what's best for them, but it's what gets them the most excited. And frankly, you could make the argument, if it gets them to the gym more often, then it's probably better for them in general, right? Because like I could try to build the most perfect program for a general athlete, but if it's not exciting and people aren't coming, then it's all for nothing, right? So like anything that gets them in the gym, I think on that level is just a win. So I think the sexy factor has to be a part of our programming, and that will trump how effective your program could be at times, I think, which is okay, I think.
For sure. The other thing that like really struck me when we started talking about this was, as a way to train, not just a way to test, is that like, if you are a CrossFit athlete, like 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be fresh when you get these lifts. Like going back to the 16.2, like I remember this year where there was a bunch of people that could clean that last bar, but it's like you have to have accumulated so much volume before that and all these other lifts. And like, it's basically like, you know, how much can we get your body trashed to see if you like earn the right to lift those heavy weights at the end? And like, you know, I feel like with workouts like this, and you know, the one downside that you wrote in your email was like the mentality about it. So like, do you think that doing, you know, obviously like training it will improve your mentality about it, but the majority of these people that don't want to lift post metcon, it's more that they're scared, right? Not that they're actually
Yes.
like physically messed up from the workout.
The more advanced the athlete gets, I think you're right about that. It's the more that they don't want to lift under a great amount of fatigue. They're perfectly capable. If you go all the way back to the gyms and you talk about a brand new beginner athlete, you actually could, you know, unintentionally get them super fatigued after just a 10-minute AMRAP, right? And now they
Right.
might not be able to lift that effectively. So that's actually a real concern in the gyms. But when we're talking about people who are training for the open, they have experience and they're good. Yeah, it's that they think about what their best numbers are on their best day ever, fresh, and now they have to go lift a max like after a conditioning piece or something else. And I think part of it's ego, right? Like they don't want to come up
Sure.
short of what they think they're capable of, so they feel like they're creating another challenge that they don't want to overcome on a regular basis, which is a shortcoming on them, frankly. But yeah, it's also super uncomfortable, right? Like you're trying to find air, you're trying to set up, you're trying to I think the best embrace that sort of thing, and they know that if they can focus for a couple seconds and get set up and pull, that it's going to be there. But many people don't do that well in CrossFit because they don't want to suffer. They really
Yep.
don't want to do that. And that example you just showed, like accumulating that many toes to bar before you have to get to the heavy barbell is like most people can't even do it. So you're not even going to get
Yep.
a shot to take a swing at your heavy bar because your hip flexors are going to break down so fast on
Yep.
those and never going to get there. Or your lungs, you just can't breathe through it. So people don't like
But
that because it's not easy.
and that's why training it and putting it first is probably even more important, you know?
The more often exactly, and that was a point my wife made to me. She's like, when we talk about conditioning first, she's like, I mean, if you even look at, you know, the highest level, which everyone wants to imagine, they're at the CrossFit games, there's like one max lift out of 13 events. It's like 7 or
Yep.
8% of your total score. Everything else is conditioning based. It doesn't even matter your skills. If you can't move fast enough to keep up, then you know what's the point? So why wouldn't
For sure.
conditioning be your top priority and strength be a very second or third based on, you know, everything else we know? But
Totally agree. So you said in your email, you know, that like 4 or 5 of the days of the week will have the strength piece following the conditioning. So like, I guess in what lifts or in what situations do you think that you should not be lifting after the Metcon in order to maximize like both? Or is that day where you're not lifting after, is that just because, you know, you do want to like what you're saying, like echo bike sprints and that kind of thing, and just like really push the engine on the conditioning part? Or do you think that like, you know, if you have a more technical lift like a snatch or something, that should, you know, be reserved? But what do you think?
I, yeah, so I think when we're talking about Olympic lifting or stuff, I don't think it's the technical side of it. I think it's probably the max power. So if there was a day I really just needed you to find that max power, I'd have a very specific warm up for that. And just if that was my focus, I guess I could put that first. But I still don't even think it needs to happen that way. I think on the
Yeah.
days that I would put lifting first would be the days that I'm more obsessed with the volume of the strength piece versus the output. So like we've done a lot of lifts where it's like 10 reps at, you know, this weight range, 10 reps at this weight range, 10 reps at this weight range, and then you have X amount of time to find a triple or a double or a single after. So I'm
Mhm.
doing the work that the Metcon would have done in your volume accumulation leading up to your heavier sets. And we found, I've always found that's the best way. Like if I'm looking at the program very like analytically and I'm like, all right, these like 3 days should not have created that much damage for people doing this right. So like we have a rest day and now I have this like fourth day after that. Should I try to like push people to see where their PR is on their front squat on this day, because I feel like this is all leading up to a very successful training day. So like on that day, I might say, you know, you're going to hit a 15, 12, 9, 15 reps at a weight that you want, 12 reps at a weight you want, 9 reps. And then I want you to find a double in 8 minutes after that. And that 15, 12, 9 will certainly warm up,
Roast you.
everything we talked about beforehand, right? So you're going to be prime, warm, breathing heavy, like ready to go. And now you basically in 8 minutes will take 3 swings at a heavy double. And there's a good chance, if you've been doing all the things you do outside of the gym recovery wise, that whole situation will give you a good opportunity to hit a PR or something at least really challenging for yourself for that day. So those would be the days that I would start with maybe a strength piece first, but also on the sports side of things, like you were talking about earlier, it is important to vary the order of the training. You don't always want to lift after, and you don't always want to lift first. But now I'm to the point where I think the majority of the time you should lift after. So I still have to give that variance in there.
For sure. So we agree that you should practice the way you play, and it's probably going to be ideal if you're a CrossFitter to prioritize the conditioning before just doing your weightlifting. Do you think that, kind of bring you back to the beginning, do you think that this is something that everyone should be doing regardless of their situation or their sport? Or do you think that this is kind of purely specific to CrossFit as a methodology?
Yeah, I think in general, I would just call it strength and conditioning again. If you value both on a fairly equal playing field, or at least both are important, then I think that the conditioning can better complement your strength work to follow. That's a very general statement. But if we're talking other sports where, let's call it soccer or swimming or something, where really your endurance and your aerobic whatever is much more important, then the strength you could lift first and do your aerobic stuff. It wouldn't matter as much because so much of the bulk of your training would be focused on a specific thing. Whereas in CrossFit, it does matter how well balanced you are, right? You have to be able to do everything. So that balance matters more. Sure. I think that is sport specific in that way, but I don't see any big downside in lifting second unless your conditioning was such a priority that you were doing 30, 60, 90 minutes of it before you lift. And then in that case, you could very easily burn through your energy stores and your lifting would be garbage. So like with the way we do it, 8 to 20 minutes before a lift of some kind of exercise at moderate to high intensity, it's not going to drain us all the way. It'll still give us plenty of power to lift with.
Right. Cool. Well, that's all the questions that I have. Thanks very much for taking the time to jump on here. And if anybody wants to know more about you or jump ship, where can they find you?
You could poke around at my little Instagram right here, or at Jump Ship Training, and just reach out on Instagram. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me, basically. So any questions, just fire away.
Cool. Thanks so much again, Seth. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah.
Let me know in the comments below how you feel about lifting after conditioning. Do you think it's smart? Do you love it? Do you hate it? And why? Thank you so much for watching. Press the like button if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you soon.